So hello, fabulous biology students. Today we are in the second part of the circulatory system lecture, and I'm going to cover several topics. One is the heartbeat cycle, the sound you hear, and another is blood clotting, and the final one is blood components. So let's get started. The heart contracts and relaxes in a cycle, and it's a rhythmic cycle. It's called the cardiac cycle. The contraction or pumping phase is called systole, and the atria contract simultaneously, and then the ventricles contract simultaneously. So you have atrial systole and ventricular systole, and then the relaxation, which is also separately done by the atria and the ventricles, is called diastole. So you have atrial diastole and ventricular diastole. When the atrium contracts, blood flows to the ventricle. You already know this. When the ventricle contracts, blood flows into the arteries of egress and out to wherever they're supposed to go. Now, let's think about the actual cycle of the beat. And it's a three-part cycle. The heartbeat sound that you can actually hear don't occur because of the contracting muscles, but occur because of the snapping shut of the valves in the heart. The first sound happens when the ventricles contract, so ventricular systole, and the valve between the atria and the ventricles snaps shut, preventing backflow. And that's number 3 here. That's what's going on here, where the ventricular systole contraction is happening, and these valves here are going to shut. When the ventricles relax, the valves on the outflow side of the ventricles snap shut, and that's the second sound you hear, and that's number 1 here. So when the ventricles relax, these two valves here, the so-called semilunar valves, snap shut. So what sound do you hear at number 2 when both are relaxed? I'll let you figure that out. Let's move on. So how much blood is actually pumped by your heart? Well, the heart rate, which is also called the pulse, is the number of beats per minute. And in your exercise today, you're going to have to take your own pulse under 2 or 3 different conditions and see what happens. So you can go ahead and take your pulse right now to practice it. The best way to do it is to not use your thumb, to feel right here with your index and middle finger on one hand, and feel right here. You want to be on the outside of that tendon. The other place you can try to do it is up in your neck. I've never liked taking it there. I always use this one instead. So I can hear it, and it's going to be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. Now, you'll need that, as I say, for your exercise. Now, the cardiac output is the volume of blood pumped into the systemic circulation per minute. So it's the heart rate times the stroke volume, which is the volume of the left ventricle. So with a heart rate of 70 beats per minute and a left ventricle volume of 75 milliliters, the cardiac output is about 5.25 liters per minute, which is about the total volume of blood once every minute, 24 hours a day for your entire life. Let's talk a little now about what blood is. Blood is considered a tissue. And further, it is considered connective tissue, much like the tissues that hold your organs together. So why would that be? Well, embryologically, that means in the embryo, blood is derived from the same tissue, a part of the embryo called mesoderm, as connective tissue. And so embryologically, they have the same origin. In addition, blood connects all the body systems to each other. So it is connective in that sense. Blood consists of 4 things: 2 different types of cells, which we'll talk about in a minute, platelets, which are used for clotting, and an aqueous solution, which we call blood plasma. About 45% of the blood volume is cells, which means 55% is that aqueous solution called plasma. Plasma is about 90% water. Among its solutes are inorganic salts in the form of ions, and those are known as electrolytes, and I'm sure you've heard that term before. Another important class of solutes are the plasma proteins. These are proteins that occur in your blood plasma, and they influence and maintain blood pH, osmotic pressure, and viscosity of the blood. All of those you probably could figure out are very important to be homeostatically maintained. In addition, Plasma proteins function in transport of materials such as lipids, in immunity, as we're going to find out, and in clotting of blood, as we're going to find out. So here is a diagram of blood, and you can see that on this side we have the 55% of the blood that is plasma, and you can see if this is 55%, this purple box over here is 45%. And the plasma is full of water, ions, plasma proteins called fibrinogen, immunoglobulins, albumin, and then substances transported by the blood, such as the nutrients that your cells need, waste products of metabolism, respiratory gases, hormones, etc. Now, of the 45% that are cellular elements, we have one class called erythrocytes, or red blood cells, and one class called leukocytes, or white blood cells, and then the platelets, which we'll talk about all three of those in a second. Red blood cells, which are also known as erythrocytes, are responsible for carrying oxygen from the lungs to the capillaries in the body. White blood cells, which are also known as leukocytes, are part of the immune system. Let's take a look at red blood cells. Men have between 5 and 6 million red blood cells per microliter of blood. Women have about 1 million less on average, between 4 and 5 million per microliter. Since the average blood volume is 4.5 to a little over 5.5 liters, this means the average human adult has about 25 trillion red blood cells. About 1% of the red blood cells are newly generated each day. That's 250 million new red blood cells made each day by the marrow of your bones. Red blood cells transport oxygen by carrying it on a protein molecule known as hemoglobin, which contains iron. And each red blood cell carries about 1 billion molecules of oxygen. Red blood cells lack a nucleus, more room for hemoglobin that way, and are biconcave. In other words, they look like donuts where the hole is still connected in the middle. And they generate their own ATP via anaerobic metabolism in order to save the oxygen for the cells deep in the body. There are 5 major types of white blood cells, or leukocytes, and you don't need to know these right now: monocytes, neutrophils, basophils, eosinophils, and lymphocytes. As I say, you don't need to know those. I just said the names so you will have heard them. They function in defense against pathogens, that is, viruses and bacteria. And some of them actually engulf bacteria and debris. In other words, they roam your blood looking for bacteria and debris, and they can actually leave the blood and go into the interstitial fluids looking for this. So they are acting like protozoans in that they engulf it and then decompose it. Others turn into B and T cells, which you may have heard of, that are very important for recognizing viruses and bacteria and destroying them. And still others roam outside the body where they attack foreign invaders in different ways. So your white blood cells are really amazing, and we are going to learn more about them when we study the immune system. Platelets are in your blood in order to help with clotting. They are formed as cytoplasmic fragments in the bone marrow, so the cells are destroyed, turned into fragments of just the cytoplasm, and then put into the blood plasma as platelets. When a blood vessel is damaged, the clotting mechanism begins, and a cascade of complex reactions, as shown in the next slide, occurs. And all I want you to see here, you can try to follow this, is that when the lining of a blood vessel is damaged, the platelets release a chemical that does a number of things. The first thing is this protein that's in your blood forms a mesh over the opening, and then the red blood cells and the platelets plug up that mesh, and they literally create your own internal Band-Aid that stops the flow of blood out of the body. It's another one of these examples of a molecular level machine that is necessary for life. Now, the final thing I want to talk to you about today is cardiovascular disease, because you've obviously heard of many of these diseases, and I want to just explain some of them to you. These are diseases of the heart and the blood vessels, and they account for more than half the deaths in the United States currently. Risk factors for having cardiovascular disease are the following: a diet that is high in animal fat, so eating a lot of meat, especially meat that contains a lot of animal fat, a lack of exercise, smoking, high rates of blood cholesterol, Those are 4 major risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And I want to talk to you for a second about cholesterol. There are 2 types, HDL and LDL cholesterol. The latter is known as the bad cholesterol because they cause the deposition of fatty deposits in the arteries. So fatty deposits in the arteries creates a condition called atherosclerosis. It's a disease of the arteries in which plaque, which is a solid substance, a solid inflexible substance that consists of fat, calcium, and cholesterol, hardens on the inside of your arteries. This does 2 things. 1, it makes your arteries less flexible, therefore more likely to break. And 2, it reduces their inside diameter, therefore creating high pressure areas and increasing the pressure of blood. So it makes it much more difficult to get blood through here. If they become entirely blocked, you can imagine that would be a big problem. A key process in clogging arteries is an inflammatory response of the immune system triggered by the accumulation of these bad cholesterol, LDL molecules, on the artery linings. So that's the relationship between cholesterol, the immune system, and heart disease. Here are some micrographs. Here is a normal artery, and then here is one where it's been blocked by plaque. And you can see that this normal, nice round artery is now significantly blocked. It's got about half of its original cross-sectional area. Other cardiovascular diseases include hypertension, which is in simple English, high blood pressure, and it promotes atherosclerosis, the clogging of arteries, and therefore increases the risk of heart attack and stroke, which I'll talk about next. And so hypertension increases the chance of atherosclerosis, but atherosclerosis tends to raise blood pressure. And so you put plaque in it, it increases the hypertension, more hypertension makes more plaque, etc. It's a positive feedback loop. Meanwhile, heart attack occurs when there is a blockage in one or more of the coronary arteries. These are the arteries that serve the heart. And as a result, cardiac muscle tissue dies. When that tissue dies, it becomes much more difficult for your heart to continue beating. And finally, stroke occurs when a blood vessel, an artery in the head, gets blocked or breaks, and therefore this causes the death of nervous tissue in the brain. So those are the 4 most common diseases associated with the cardiovascular system, and I thought you should know about them. So that's it for today. I hope you have a good understanding of the following things. 1, the noise in your heart and how that relates to the contraction of the atria and the ventricles. 2, what is blood and what are its components and what do they do? And 3, what are the common diseases of the cardiovascular system, of your circulatory system? So be sure to come to class next time with any questions you have about anything you did not understand this or questions that you would like to answer that extend this talk. Until then, keep working hard.